Welcome everyone. My name's Isla Greenwood. I'm a poet, musician, textiles artist, and I work with Just Stop Oil. And I'm here because at times like these, I feel that it's so important that we come together and share our stories and compare notes about systems of oppression and control that are related to the extraction of oil and the accumulation of finite resources. This will be a space to look more deeply into not only how the climate is affected by the extraction of use in oil, but how social landscapes are shaped by it, how communities are destroyed by it, and how people's freedoms, access to land and lives are taken away by it. This is something we see more and more every day. The extraction of oil, amongst other finite resources, has been a catalyst for some of the worst atrocities that we have ever seen. And these are not historic incidents. These are happening now, today, in Palestine, in South Sudan, in the Congo, in Iraq, Syria, to name just a few. Oil is the underlying resource around which global power dynamics have formed and become entangled. And we can't deny it. Our lives depend on it. We currently depend on it. We depend on our governments to provide it. And they then see it to maintain power. So we're stuck in a bind with this resource. It allows some of us to move quickly through the world, and it powers so much of the way that many of us live. But the consumption of oil continues to strip people of their land, destroy their communities, and take away their lives. And this has been happening for too long now, which is why we continue to open these discussions and push for the expansion of oil to be limited or stopped. I have a short poem that I've written that I'd like to share with you. And then we'll begin the talks. The pursuit for oil will drive through communities, ecosystems, and minds. The pursuit for oil does not care who we are tonight or who we are tomorrow, because the pursuit for oil is in opposition to human life. The pursuit for oil does not listen. The pursuit for oil is an all-round exploitation, extraction, maximized capital expedition. The pursuit for oil demands dominance and control. The pursuit for oil does not listen. The pursuit for oil does not sweat, but demands the blood and tears of other lives, which it forgets. The pursuit for oil does not judge, discern, or analyze. The pursuit for oil does not even try to look you in the eyes. The pursuit for oil does not sweat. The pursuit for oil comes in disguise. The pursuit for oil dresses up in a suit and shouts prosperity in a pitch too high. The pursuit for oil makes man think he has the finest mind. The pursuit for oil does not know life. The pursuit for oil knows lies. The pursuit for oil knows invasion, demands separation, knows pollution, exclusion, and genocide. The pursuit for oil cuts land in half with pencil lines. The pursuit for oil is not yours and is not mine. So this is why we're here today. It's not a new conversation, but developments in Palestine over the past few weeks have brought this really into the mainstream again. So we wanted to create a space where we could expand upon our understandings of the way global power structures and dirty politics instigate and perpetuate war, violence, and exploitation worldwide. We will hear from individuals who have worked against these systems, who have researched and written about them, who have seen their communities and homelands torn apart by them. And the idea of this talk is to paint a picture of the multiple insidious ways that oil extraction is working in opposition to human life, so that we can stress again the importance of stopping development of any new oil extraction facilities in the UK and worldwide. So tonight, our amazing panel of speakers includes the legendary activist Angie Zelter, Palestine Action co-founder Huda Ammori, long-standing anti-fossil fuel activist from Ogoniland in the Niger Delta, Lazarus Tamana, renowned author and anthropologist Jeff Halper, and former South African politician and corruption investigator Andrew Feinstein. So just a gentle reminder that Just Stop Oil hosts this panel with our guiding principles of curiosity, humility, love, trust, and compassion. This is an open discourse and discussion where we represent a difference of opinion, and the views expressed by our guests are their own. We'll be having a Q&A with the panel, so if you have a question about tonight's topic you would like to ask, then please post it in the chat and we will endeavour to have these questions asked. We will also hear from one of our amazing Just Stop Oil supporters, Bertie, who will tell us about his experiences and why civil resistance is so important, and he'll be speaking at the end, so please stick around for that. It's always super interesting. And after the talks, there are optional breakout rooms. These are for particularly people who are new to Just Stop Oil and have questions and want to find out more. And really importantly, tonight after the panel will be launching a poll. So please take 2 seconds to complete this poll and be directed to ways that you can get involved, because that's so much about, what making change is about, is bringing people together. We would like to just let you know about the pathways to action that you can take. So the first one is people are committing to slow marching, which you've probably seen in the news, and this does risk arrest at least once. You can join slow marches in London for the remainder of this week, every day at midday at Trafalgar Square. You can also join hundreds of people who are marching in solidarity with 9 Just Stop Oil political prisoners, demanding that the Met Police jail the real criminals responsible for new oil and gas. And that is this Saturday, the 2nd of December, 12 p.m. at New Scotland Yard. So thing 2 you can do is attending non-violence training and learning skills and resilience to join us in civil resistance and feel part of our community of trust. You can volunteer. People are volunteering their time to help the PIT campaign, using skills and energy to resist. There are loads of different ways to help. You can also donate, so this is really useful for us. Perhaps you could donate 1 hour of monthly income, so £10 is an hour of pay. You could pay £10 a month. This ensures that we can support everyone who joins the campaign, and also that we can plan for the future. So please submit any questions you have via the Q&A function. And now we will get started. So our first guest is the incredible Huda Ammori. Huda is co-founder of Palestine Action and is of Palestinian and Iraqi heritage. Before Palestine Action, she conducted extensive research and coordinated national campaigns to end British complicity with Israeli apartheid. After realising the limitations of traditional campaign tactics, she moved on to taking sustained direct action. Thank you so much for joining us, Huda, tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for organising this talk. So I'm going to start by talking about Iraq, which is where my mother's family are from. And we remember very well in 2003 when the UK and the US decided to invade Iraq on the false premise of there being weapons of mass destruction. Of course, it was clear what they were trying to do, and it was no coincidence that Iraq is one of the richest countries in terms of their natural resources, specifically on their oil reserves. During that time, they had massacred over hundreds and thousands of Iraqi people. At the start of the war, we lost communication with our own family for several months because they destroyed all communications. People couldn't make phone calls, connect to the internet, etc. And where my family is originally from is Basra, and Basra is home to 70% of Iraq's oil reserves, and Iraqis often talk about their oil reserves as being the biggest curse that they have because of all of the imperialism and colonialism that it comes from and destruction. And Basra was completely destroyed by the Americans and by the British with very clear motivations. One of our family friends, he was a doctor in Iraq, and it was in 2007 when he was out with his wife, and his older son was also out, and his home was struck with a missile. He had 11 other children who were all killed in one strike on their house, and the only person who survived was their nephew, because he was a baby, and the cot turned around to act as shelter to protect him from the destruction of their home. And this is just one story of thousands that have happened to the Iraqi people and people all across the world in conquest of Western imperialism. And Iraq, before 2003, all of their oil reserves were nationalized. After I think it was after 2011, most of the oil reserves are privatized to foreign companies who are making a killing off that oil, while the people in Iraq have not recovered. Their economy has not recovered. I was there recently. You know, you don't even get more than 20 minutes without a power cut going on there. I mean, the country has been completely destroyed, but many companies are getting richer and richer off Iraqi oil. Palestine, which has been subject to colonialism by Britain. Britain has been complicit in the colonization of Palestine for over 100 years. It was Britain who issued the Balfour Declaration, basically calling for a Jewish homeland in historic Palestine, where the majority of the indigenous population were not Jewish. Britain were on the ground themselves. British soldiers were on the ground, and they had arrested and suppressed uprisings from the Palestinian people. They had destroyed indigenous villages, and they also killed my great-grandfather during this time. And it was the British who had armed and trained Zionist militia to commit the Nakba, which is when they forced out more than 750,000 Palestinians, more than half of the indigenous population at the time, destroyed over 500 towns and villages, and massacred many families. And the Nakba never stopped, and it's never been more clear than right now. The system of occupation, ethnic cleansing, oppressing the indigenous population and occupying them continues to this very day. What we're seeing in Gaza, which has been described many times as the world's largest open-air prison, been under a blockade for over 15 years, where majority of the population are children and the majority are refugees who are constantly bombarded, not just recently. It's been going on for many, many decades, the oppression against the Palestinian people. And not only are they keeping Palestinians captive in their own land, but they also keep their economy captive in many ways by restricting what can go in and out, restricting their access to natural resources, such as restricting their access to clean drinking water, destroying their power plants, which they did in 2014 and on different occasions as well. But what we've seen is how the Israeli weapons industry uses this as a way of developing their weaponry, testing new weaponry. So they making a killing of the oppression of the Palestinian people. We've seen in the recent escalation of the genocide, over 20,000 Palestinians killed, many thousands still under the rubble, hospitals destroyed, not functioning. I'm sure most of us have seen the scenes coming out right now from Gaza, and ElbitEight has used this, as well as largest weapons firm, as an opportunity to test out their new Iron Sting missiles, which have left burns on those who've been killed and those who've been injured, unlike any that they've seen before. There's weaponry this is weaponry that we will see on the global market very soon. And not only are the Israeli weapons industry profiting from this, we know that they are after natural gas reserves just off the coast of Gaza, with billions of pounds for the Israelis. But it's very clear that this has been a system of ethnic cleansing. And I just urge people that when we see what's happening now in Gaza, to remember that this is a 24/7 reality that's been going on for over 75 years. Unfortunately, we only see it, or it's only at the forefront of society when it is at its absolute peak. But if we really want to stand in solidarity with people who are being colonized, people who are having their lives destroyed, then we have to act even when the news are quiet, which is the majority of the time. A ceasefire, whilst it will momentarily stop the killing, it will not end the military occupation and apartheid. And that is what we have to fight for when it comes to Palestine, because we cannot wait until the next time it gets all over the news, because by then it is too late. Every moment we don't act is a moment too late. And we have to pull together in terms of our different movements and focus on fighting against the climate crisis while simultaneously fighting against colonialism. These are two forms which are destroying our planet and the people living on it. And if we want a better world, a world that is worth saving, then we've got to defeat the industries that profit from colonialism and oil. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Huda. That was brilliant and really succinct and really powerful message that you shared at the end. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your experiences and your heart with us. Our next speaker is Andrew Feinstein. Andrew is the Executive Director of Shadow World Investigations, formerly Corruption Watch. He is the author of The Shadow World Inside the Global Arms Trade, described as the most thorough account of the global arms trade ever written. The book was made into an award-winning feature documentary. Andrew served as an ANC MP under Nelson Mandela in South Africa. He was forced out of parliament by Mandela's successor, Thabo Mbeki, for blowing the whistle on a deeply corrupt $10 billion arms deal concluded by his own government. His best-selling book on this is After the Party, Corruption, the ANC and South Africa's Uncertain Future. Andrew is listed as a global arms expert by the Forum on the Arms Trade and has won numerous anti-corruption and whistleblowing awards. He serves on the board and advisory council of Stop the War, Declassified UK, Initiative Against Illicit Finance Uganda, Lighthouse Reports, and the Platform to Protect Whistleblowers in Africa. He appears regularly on Double Down News, Al Jazeera, and numerous other media outlets. What a pleasure to have us with you, Andrew. Please take it away.
Thanks so much. And thank you so much for the interview. It's an enormous privilege to be talking to you as Just Stop Oil, but also to be talking just after Huda and with so many other extraordinary activists on the panel. And I say that because I think that in the world in which we live today, where, for instance, in the UK, we have record numbers of billionaires and more people having to use food banks than at any time since the end of the Second World War. And I think at this sort of time, direct action is really the most important peaceful means that we have to be able to bring about fundamental structural, political, and economic change. I'm going to talk mainly about arms and money, because those are the areas of my expertise. The most important thing to bear in mind is that the trade in weapons is the most corrupt of all global trades, accounting for around 40% of all corruption in all world trade. But what is as crucial to understand is not only the extraordinary extent of this corruption, which is hidden behind a veil of national security imposed secrecy, so that it is incredibly rare for those senior military officials, senior politicians, senior corporate executives, and various awful intermediaries, it is very rare that any of them face the legal consequences of their actions. But also crucial to understand is that these bribes, this corruption, oils the wheels of our political systems. And I use the word oils intentionally. Since the end of the Second World War, we estimate that the defense companies have been either the first or second largest contributors to political parties in the so-called Western world. But in addition to that, the vast majority of senior politicians have been personally corrupted by the trade in weapons. The most obvious of those would be Tony Blair, who, when Margaret Thatcher was asked of her greatest political achievement, her answer was Mr. Blair, because he turned what was supposed to be a social democratic Labour Party into a neoliberal party, whose leaders believed that they too should benefit from the material rewards that were accruing to what David Graeber referred to as the 1%. Our work estimates that after leaving office, Tony Blair has made a minimum of £110 million personally, directly out of the decision to invade Iraq that Huda was talking about, and out of his association with corrupt British arms companies. The trade in weapons is, to put it crudely, an industry that counts its profits in billions and refuses to count its losses, which are in human lives. And of course, as I'm sure many of you know, the defense sector is one of the biggest polluters on the planet. 27% of all jet fuel, the dirtiest of all fuels that is used in the world, is used by military aircraft. The Pentagon is the single largest institutional polluter on the planet. And of course, conflict, which is required to keep our defense budgets at the extraordinarily high and indefensible levels that they are at year after year, and which is used by our politicians to present themselves as our safekeepers, as the defenders of our supposed democratic values. These conflicts lead to massive degradation of the environment, lead to massive population dislocation that in turn has devastating impacts on the environment, on our planet. But we must also build into this equation the gargantuan socioeconomic opportunity costs of our spending on defense and national security. In 2022, that figure, excluding the costs of war making by the United States of America, the country involved in more conflicts than any other, totaled over $2.2 trillion. The vast majority of which was spent on arms. Many of those arms, even if one had to look at this in the absurd, narrow paradigm of national security, most of those arms were not fit for purpose, like the F-35 jet fighter, which cost the American taxpayer over $2 trillion, and according to a US Inspector General of Defense, simply doesn't work. Just imagine what we could spend that money on: global pandemics, renewable energy, ameliorating the climate catastrophe that gets worse every day. But there are other ways in which these factors intertwine. And to give you an indication of this very quickly in the time that I have, I'm going to talk to you about the Al Yamama arms deal, which, if you want a sort of a shorthand on it, go onto YouTube and watch the film of one of my books. The film is just called Shadow World, that lays out this deal and lays out the systemic nature of the global arms trade. 6 billion pounds of bribes were paid on this deal between Britain and Saudi Arabia, to Saudi royals, to the son of the prime minister at the time, Mark Thatcher, to the chief executive of BAE Systems, to all sorts of military leaders, intermediaries, etc. How were they able to pay these bribes? By Saudi Arabia paying for the weapons in oil, which they could under and over invoice as they needed to hide the corruption. So this is something that characterizes the nature of our global politics. But I don't want you, in hearing the enormity of the system that we face, to in any way lose hope. Because my own personal experience of having to leave my country of birth, South Africa, in 1986, when it was an apartheid state, believing that I would never be able to return, where 5 years later, Nelson Mandela was released from prison, and 4 years later became president of a democratic South Africa. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing. Really, really powerful words. Our third panelist tonight is a dear friend to Just Stop Oil, Lazarus Tamana. Lazarus is an international activist, defender for human rights, environmental and indigenous issues. Native of Bodo City in Gokana local government area of Ogoniland, River State, Nigeria, Lazarus is president of the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People, MSOP, Nigeria. He has been a key member of the movement since 1991. He was the European coordinator from 1997 to 2020. Lazarus played a strategic role in the case of indigenous Bodo people who successfully sued Shell in the London court in 2014 for oil spills, which occurred in Ogoniland in 2008. Last month, Lazarus held a demonstration against Shell's activities in the Niger Delta outside King's Cross in London. It is an honor to have us.
I extend my warm greetings to all the activists. I thank the organizers of this event that we are all taking part in today. The issue that we are discussing are extremely difficult issues depending on wherever you are coming from. Myself as an Ogoni man, an indigenous people living in the Niger Delta part of Nigeria, we have experienced most of these things that has already been discussed on this platform this evening. I can relate to Huda, what she was saying in relation to the colonial masters, the invasion of Iraq, and the reference to Palestine under occupation. The Ogoni people have gone through all those things and that. I can also relate to Andrew about what you said concerning the arms industry and the huge amount of corruption that is involved in that. We witnessed that from the Nigerian government, and we also witnessed that from the operations of Shell. So all these stories are all interconnected and they are related. And the problems that we are experiencing in the world today are all connected to all these things we are talking about. The people who are ruling us in various countries and operating on various levels are the major people who are involved in all these activities. We are just a pawn, that they are using to advance whatever they are doing. It is unfortunate, but we as activists, we must stand up for our rights. We must push it as JSO are doing and other organizations like Extinction Rebellion and all your respective organizations, the little that each and every one are doing concerning this corruption level, these climate issues, and that those are the things that will rescue us tomorrow. If we don't push it, I am very, very sure that it will be more disastrous than what we are experiencing today. I want to just briefly talk about the Ogoni people who has been campaigning against Shell for donkey years. In fact, we actually formed movement for the survival of the Ogoni people in 1990, and since then we have been fighting, for a clean environment. We have been fighting what people call climate change today. We did that right from the beginning. We saw it coming and we raised the issue. And the polluters, the major polluters like Shell and the Nigerian government that are benefiting from it, didn't want to know. And today, the entire planet has been engulfed by all these careless activities. from the United States to the other end of the world, China, and all over and that. So the fossil fuel companies that has kept us the way that we are, particularly the Ogoni people and the people of the Niger Delta, they are those who are in control of the money that is coming out of oil extraction. The level of poverty that my people are going through, even in the midst of massive money that they get from about 2 million barrels of oil being produced on a daily basis. I just came back to Guniland several weeks ago, and I saw for the first time, I have never experienced this level of deprivation. The people are extremely poor. Nothing is going on. People will finish school and there are no jobs. In fact, the agriculture that we used to practice, nothing is there anymore. The fishing that is the occupation of the people of Ogoni and the Niger Delta is dried up because of pollution, devastation, gas flaring, and all these things and that. So we are really facing a very difficult time, which we have to do something about it. The government doesn't care at all. Shell is not interested. They are making billions of dollars every three months, but they are not worried. So we have to do something about all these issues. When we talk about corruption, it was Shell that introduced corruption into Nigeria when they came in about 1938 to 1939, when the mining lease was given to Shell by the British government. That was before Nigeria was independent. And this company that brought corruption to Nigeria are still there manipulating the situation. They are not worried about anything that happens to the indigenous people from where they are operating these things and that. The people are extremely very, very poor. And the Nigerian government are not, they cannot hold Shell to account because they are those who are benefiting from what Shell is producing. It has to be something that we can do to make sure that all these things end. It is the little steps that each of us in different regions of the world are making sense out of it that will make the difference. And organizers of this program who have brought all of us together to bring our views, to expose what is happening in each of these regions and that, are the key people who are bringing this topic so that we can discuss them and see a solution to the problem. The big government, like the Nigerian government that is a giant in Africa in terms of size and in terms of money that they are getting, they are those who are the most corrupt because the ordinary people in Nigeria don't see this money. The rate of poverty in that region now is something that I've never seen before. And what do we do? If you look at the colonial masters, they are also those who are in control of most of these activities because Nigeria will tell you that it's an independent country, but in reality, they are not independent. They are still being controlled from London. They are still being directed from the United States of America in terms of policy, in terms of programs, in terms of other activities. Let nobody make any mistake. The influence is huge. And they are not for the interest of the population of Nigerians, who are those who are facing this hardship. They are concerned about big businesses like fossil fuel companies like Shell, Chevron, and the rest of the people. You know, how much money that can enter their pockets and all those things and that. Andrew mentions the name of Tony Blair. Those are the people that they use to run all this errand, to intimidate all these heads of government, particularly the African heads of government and those in South America, to get their own way and all that. I mean, these are things that it is unacceptable. But because most of the people are not, they are not aware of these things, they are not enlightened to understand it, it becomes extremely very difficult for them to see what is actually happening. I think that it is time for us to take more drastic actions. You talk about United Nations. United Nations is just a system that cannot act. They are being influenced. Whatever is happening, they cannot make that decision. Because who are the people we refer to as United Nations? It's the G20. And they are those who are manipulating all these things. So it is something that we as activists must look at it, because the level of corruption that my people are experiencing, the level of deprivation, the level of neglect, is extremely beyond reasoning. And we cannot continue in this way. And I think that forum or forums of this manner are helping us, and we should take advantage of it and do something more meaningful in terms of coming up with a decision, and we try to implement it as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Lazarus. It's always so interesting to hear you share your experiences and your stories. So yeah, just to add now, don't forget, if you have a question for our speakers, you can submit it in the chat or send a direct message to Bea or Al, co-hosts. So next up we have a true icon, Angie Zelter. Angie has been an active campaigner for over 40 years, having initiated and participated in many civil resistance campaigns around the world. She's founded a number of organisations, including the Citizens Recovery of Indigenous Stolen Property Organisation and the International Women's Peace Service Palestine. She has been arrested around 200 times all over the globe and has spent over 2 years in total in prison awaiting trials on remand or serving sentences. Most well known of her actions is the disarmament of BAE Hawk jet that was to be sent to East Timor and the dismantlement of part of the Trident nuclear weapons system at Loch Goil. She continues to actively confront the abuses of corporations, governments, and the military, and defines herself as a global citizen. Over to the amazing Angie.
Thank you very much, and it's a great honour to be here with you today. Let's hope we can find some things that we can do about all of these terrible things happening. Climate change causes war, and war causes climate change. That's the main message of Extinction Rebellion Peace, set up in 2019. Our aim is to raise awareness of the role of militarism and war in the climate crisis, and to demand that resources allocated to the military be used instead to address the climate emergency. During the 2-week October 2019 XR rebellion, we occupied the Victoria Embankment outside the Ministry of Defence and Trafalgar Square, and blockaded entrances into BAE Systems headquarters and the Supreme Court. We organised during those 2 weeks 9 climate not war actions, resulting in many arrests. We have, of course, participated in many other non-violent direct actions targeting arms manufacturers and nuclear military bases. When we started, the public were not generally aware of the huge impact of militarization on the environment and climate. Powerful governments of high polluting countries in the global north, such as the USA and Britain, have refused to disclose the extent of military-related emissions to avoid jeopardizing lucrative arms and military aid contracts. This was a serious omission, given that the UK military and arms companies produce more carbon emissions than 60 individual countries combined. The military-industrial complex is highly energy-intensive and dependent on oil, one of the reasons for the continuing oil wars. The UK arms industry emits 1.46 million tonnes of carbon dioxide annually, equivalent to the emissions of all domestic flights in the UK. Globally, the total military carbon footprint is approximately 5.5% of global emissions. If the world's militaries were a country, this would be the fourth largest national carbon footprint in the world, greater than that of Russia. Militarism is a central pillar of the extractive systems causing climate change. Corporations pillage resources for profit all over the world. When locals protest, brutal military or private security forces back up the companies involved. There are around 114 armed conflicts raging today, and many of them are resource wars over oil, water, minerals, land. They are about control and the abuse of power. The wars in Ukraine and Gaza have caused thousands of deaths and injuries. In Gaza, Israeli troops have killed over 20,000 civilians in what amounts to genocide. Climate change is already a significant cause of conflicts and a key factor driving the refugee crisis. There are over 117 million refugees and displaced people in the world today, and global warming is causing more. Borders are becoming more militarized as nations pursue their racist policies. The risk of nuclear war is increasing as international relations deteriorate and climate chaos triggers further conflict. The use of just a fraction of the current global nuclear arsenal could result in a nuclear winter, leading to global famine. As long as countries continue to prepare for and resort to war as a means of solving conflict, we will be unable to address climate change. All people on Earth face a common threat. To avert catastrophe, we must put aside narrow national self-interest and work together to save our shared home. We also have to change the structures that hold us back. The global economic system based on extractivism and growth at any cost is destroying life on Earth. The main beneficiaries of this economic model of endless growth are corrupt corporations and banks. Today, 157 of the 200 richest entities in the world are corporations, not governments. Corporations benefit the rich and exploit the poor all over the world, assisted by the World Bank, insurers, investors, and the trade agreements that have the power to sue governments for billions of dollars outside of their national legal systems. To deal with our current existential crises, we must restructure our societies away from power abuses towards a global society that respects and upholds human rights for every single person in the world. We have to get into the streets in our hundreds of thousands, in our millions globally, and keep the pressure on week after week to demand the changes we need, undeterred by new anti-protest laws and harsher legal repercussions. We may have to commit acts of non-violent sabotage, as I have done against industries causing planetary breakdown. We have to change the current them and us culture that categorizes some nations as our enemies, who are vilified and called out for breaking international laws, and our friends, who we back up and provide with money and weapons even when they are committing genocide. We, as ordinary, humane, global citizens, have many of the solutions to our problems, but we have to join together to demand the solutions are put into practice. One way of doing this is to organize local people's assemblies to discuss solutions and policy changes, but we must also keep up the protests. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angie. Really great to hear some ideas for how we move forward as well. So thank you so much for sharing. So remember, everyone, we have a poll coming up soon about how you might like to be involved with Just the Boil. So keep thinking of what pathway to action might work for you. So our final speaker tonight is the brilliant Jeff Halper. Jeff is an Israeli-American anthropologist, author, lecturer, and political activist. He is the director of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, which is a non-violent direct action group originally established to oppose and resist Israeli demolition of Palestinian houses in the occupied territory. Jeff is also a founding member of the One Democratic State campaign. In addition to many academic and political writings, he is the author of An Israeli in Palestine, about his work against the occupation and obstacles to peace, War Amongst the People, Israel, the Palestinians, and Global Pacification, which was shortlisted for the Palestine Book Award. His latest book is Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, Zionism, Settler Colonialism, and the Case for One Democratic State. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Jeff. Please take it away.
All right, thank you very much for having me. It's been a very enlightening and interesting, provocative discussion. I just have to say that I have a new granddaughter who's 2 months old, whose name is Ines. So just to make that connection.
Congratulations.
I often write about what I call global Palestine, because, of course, the Palestinian issue and the awful things happening today in Gaza, the war crimes in Gaza, are localized to some degree. And we have the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, so-called, and that whole dynamic. But in fact, Israel-Palestine in many ways is a microcosm of the relationship between the global North and the global South. So there's a lot of issues built into the, one thing we might take as an advocacy educational strategy is to look at particular issues and help people understand all the other issues built into it. Because often we get siloed into single issue sorts of things and people don't always connect the dots. And certainly what I've tried to do in the Palestine issue is to say that it's not only a Palestine issue, it's a global issue, and use that microcosm to bring out all the other issues. And you certainly see that in terms of what's happening in Gaza today. I've written in my book, War Against the People, about how Israel really uses the Palestinian territories as a laboratory for perfecting, developing weapons, and not only weapon systems, but surveillance systems, of course, the Pegasus, the NSO systems, many surveillance systems that are known and are used by your own municipalities. So this doesn't go only on a military level, it gets down also to a local and municipal level as well. And overall, I would say, oil isn't directly connected to our issue in a sense, the Palestine issue, although I do want to point out that Israel's become one of the major natural gas suppliers in the world, discovering these large fields of natural gas in the Mediterranean, and that does relate directly to Gaza, because part of the fields, the Leviathan field in particular, about a third of it is in the territorial waters of Gaza. So that what Israel is doing, although we can't document it completely, but what we suspect Israel is doing is drilling down, and then you can drill, or not drill, you can extract for about 1 kilometer horizontally. So in other words, digging down into the fields in Israel's territorial waters, but then extending their pipes horizontally into the Gazan waters and extracting their natural gas. So the idea is that we'll extract the natural gas from Gaza, and which is a tremendous resource potentially for Gaza, and then Once that's empty, we'll begin to work with the fields in our own territorial waters. So there is a natural gas, oil, energy, Gaza component to all of this. Overall, I would say, we just have a few minutes to talk, so I just want to go to this point, really. What's Israel's role in this whole story that we're trying to tell? And that is, if oil is war, as we know it is, Israel has become, again, through its Palestinian laboratory, one of the major enforcers of the capitalist system, the extractive system we have today. As capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, becomes more and more constricting, as more and more people, including the middle classes in the global north, are being excluded from the global economy, the whole system has to become more repressive. And as Andrew said, the United States and Britain and a lot of the big global north arms producers aren't producing the weapons of repression that are needed. They're producing, as Andrew says, the F-35, but that doesn't help you very much in what we call wars against the people, as we can see from the American experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, and even here to some degree. And so, Israel's had this Palestinian laboratory now for 76 years. Even before that, in some ways, in the British period, where the Zionist militias cooperated with the British Army in subduing the Great Revolt of 1936 and 1939. So Israel has, even though it's a young state, has probably one of the longest histories of a war against the people. Because this is a war, this isn't a war of armies. This is a war of colonization, settler colonization, taking land, displacing people. So in many ways, again, what's happening here is a microcosm of what's happening all around the world. And Israel has developed then weaponry, tactics of population control, tactics of pacification, surveillance tools, and other technologies of repression that are used not only by militaries, of course, but by police forces as well. Israel produces 60%, for example, of the world's drones, surveillance and weaponized drones. And if not a majority, close to a majority of drones being used today are being used by police forces rather than militaries. So that Israel is providing a dual, in a sense, service to the hegemons of the world. One is it's helping to enforce global pacification. Enforcing the global North's hegemony over the whole world economic system. And there's almost no country in the world that isn't involved in the Israeli arms trade, including countries that have no diplomatic relations with Israel, like Saudi Arabia, for example, but many, many others. Israel is everywhere. And the other part of it is that Israel also provides, of course, weaponry for repressive regimes all over the world. The United States might have, military bases in 174 countries, but in many ways you could argue that Israel's global reach, not only in terms of, again, military, but in terms of more localized securitization, is much wider or larger than that of the United States. Because the United States has bases, and their bases are fairly contained, and they have all the McDonald's and their movie theaters, and then they fly out once in a while to missions somewhere. Israel is everywhere, in countries the United States has never heard of, like, for example, Equatorial Guinea, in which the mistress and the strongest, one of the strongest people, the woman who's connected to the dictator is an Israeli woman, actually. And Equatorial Guinea has tremendous oil resources, is one of the poorest and most repressive countries in the world. It's not a country of interest to the global north in many ways. But there Israel's involved with the presidential guard, with the police, with the security forces, as well as the military. And this can be replicated everywhere. The Congo, Nigeria, of course, Myanmar, China. Israel is the #2 arms supplier to China after Russia. So that Israel really covers the whole spectrum of enforcing the global capitalist system for the global north. It has very close relations to all the BRICS countries. So in many ways, it's, through its military prowess, it's able to also play that base. And it's very strong in all the repressive regimes of the global south. So that this is a real, example of global Palestine. And of course, since resource wars are one of the, are maybe the major source of wars today, I think we have to really look at the Israeli presence. We have to look not only at how war is generated by oil and resource wars, but how they're put down and how we're all pacified, whether it's people living in oil-producing countries, or whether it's people living in repressive regimes in general, or whether those of us in the global south, in the global north who are trying to influence things. We're all in the process of being pacified. And I think that's where, looking at Israel really becomes important in what we've been talking about.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Brilliant. And really useful conclusion as well. So that is the end of our speakers, and we will now move on to a Q&A, which is the chance for the audience to interact with our wonderful panel. This will be a roundtable discussion where we'll ask a couple of questions, and due to time we can't answer all your questions, and I should also just let you know that so I will pose a question. We've got a couple of questions to everyone and a couple of direct questions to individuals. So I'm going to begin with a question to everyone, and then if panelists, if you could keep your answer to a maximum of 2 minutes, that would be great. And I'll just give you a heads up when it's coming to the end if you need that. So and perhaps we'll go in the order of speakers. So Huda is not here anymore. So who went up to Huda? Andrew, you could go first. So question for everyone. Rajan asked, how do we reach out to one another, educate each other, and respond positively to those who reach out to us? Which is also similar to Tina's question, what more can we do to educate the public? So Andrea, if you'd like to begin with your thoughts on that question, that would be brilliant.
So I think the first thing we can do is to share our skills. And I think we have a responsibility for all of us involved in this sort of work to share skills with others. We in particular, we do a lot of investigative work that tends to expose who has provided arms to whom, who's made money. We're working on a book at the moment on the Yemen conflict. And of course, all the same people turn up in all of these conflicts as making money from them. And the investigative methods we use don't require any sort of genius intellect to utilize, otherwise I wouldn't be able to use them. They really are, some of them are incredibly simple. It's a matter of knowing what tools are available to look for certain types of information. You'd be amazed how many court documents from all over the world are available online. So what we try and do in our organization is we do regular investigative methods training courses, which we do ideally in person, but obviously because we're based in London, and we also do huge amounts of them online. And we've trained thousands of activists and campaigners in these methodologies. because we're an organization of 6 people. We have lots of associates and partners, but we can only do so much investigation. So for anybody in a local area, in a region, in a country who's interested in investigating something where the information doesn't seem to be publicly available, go onto our website at Shadow World Investigations and just register for an investigative methods course. And believe me, I mean, I'm very proud of myself when I manage to send a photo on Instagram and when I manage to actually save a Word document properly. So this really doesn't require any particular skills. And we can impart our experience to others so that they can do similar sort of investigative work, which can inform our political campaigns, whatever sort of work you're doing, wherever you are based.
That's great. Thank you, Andrew. Lazarus, if you would like to hear the question again, also I'm happy to repeat it. Just let me know.
Andrew said is very, very vital. You know, another thing I want to add is more communication amongst the groups and sharing of information, because that can help a great deal. Like today, I am meeting almost all the panelists for the first time. And that if we have more of this going on, then we can share more information and go back to our respective groups and organizations and spread the information, spread the ideas, you know, on how we can collaborate on so many things and that. So that is what I think that we should do.
Thank you, Lazarus. Communication is super important. What would we do without it? Angie, your turn.
I think talking to as many people as possible is really important, including friends and relatives and your neighbours. It's sometimes very, very difficult to talk to your neighbours. They have very different political views and things, but people seem to be scared these days of saying what they think. And I think we have to encourage people to say what they think, even if it might be against what most people or what their opinion is, because we learn from each other that way. We have to get the information out of our bubbles. So yeah, put stuff on your internet and in your email list, but try also to try and get it out into other places, which means that we have to go into those other places. How about doing some trials on the streets? You know, not very many people go into the court cases, but we can have these trials out on the streets, you know, street operas, all sorts of things. For instance, we put up the kind of walls, an apartheid wall outside in the streets to show what it's like when people can't get through. The other thing is, if you are up for into court, think about representing for yourself rather than getting lawyers to talk for you. You have to prepare for that. It's scary, but it means that you can say a hell of a lot more than lawyers can get away with saying. So that's important as well. So I really do think it's really, really important to get out and talk face to face. Don't just rely on emails and stuff. Just that ordinary stuff of going out into your local community and explaining why you're writing those letters to the press all the time, or why you're getting arrested all the time, or whatever. So that's the main thing that I would suggest.
Thank you, Angie. Really, really useful reminder of that connection in person is so key. Jeff, you're next.
Well, I'm an old 60s guy, and we always believed in organization. That's kind of what's gone out the window the last generation or two. There's no more organization. It's all social movements are great, and we see it now with Palestine. You have 300,000 people out on the streets in London, support for Palestinians all over the world, but we're not really able to translate that into political power because social movements don't do that. Social movements can mobilize people, but then they're stuck. There's a lack of leadership. There's no follow-up. There's no ways of really dealing in a over time with decision makers. of making alliances. They're very ephemeral, these kinds of rallies. We remember the Black Lives Matter rallies that made tremendous waves. I mean, Trump was going to call out the army. Again, where is it today? These things tend to disappear. And I think we have to look at organizing. I have a whole proposal, if anybody's interested. It's called the People Yes Network, in which I think we have to break out of our silos. When I come to talk about Palestine, you know, the people that come to my talk are people interested in Palestine. Nobody interested in third world debt, oil, climate change, women's issues, whatever, come to my talks. I mean, there's a million activists in every community I go to. I get the sliver that's interested in Palestine. And I think that's our weakness, because we're not going to be able to do things, you know, piece by piece. We have to have what I call, we're never going to have an organization. We're the left. The left is a herd of cats. We cannot organize ourselves. We don't follow each other. We don't talk to each other very much. We're suspiciously, we really have some issues. But what we could do is build an infrastructure. All right, I'm finishing. We can build an infrastructure that you can join voluntarily, in which organizations and groups from all different kinds of issues can come together and share information and begin to build campaigns together. We've got to think in terms of organization and not merely mobilization.
Wicked. Thank you, everyone. Loads of really positive, powerful tools that are offered on the table there, which hopefully we can all take forward with us in our daily lives. So next question, which probably will be our last question, and this is for everyone again, is non-violent civil resistance the most important tool for change at the moment? So we'll go with the same order again. So starting with Andrew Feinstein, that is non-violent civil resistance the most important tool for change at the moment?
I suppose it depends how you define non-violence and civil resistance. You know, I think there are many strategies that we have to use. And I think that what a number of the other speakers have said is really, really important. What Jeff says about organizing. I mean, we're looking in the UK at a situation at the moment where we're going to have an election within the next year, where we have a Tory party that is probably the most mendacious, corrupt party we've ever seen in government. And we have an opposition party, the Labour Party, led by my own constituency MP Keir Starmer, which is the most mendacious, corrupt, mediocre Tory-like party in waiting. So, you know, this is a remarkable choice that we face. Now, we as progressives need to decide, how do we challenge this? I do believe that civil resistance is the most important thing that we can do, if we understand by that direct action, as we've seen from groups like Palestine Action, from groups like Jeff's, from Angie's entire history of activism over many, many years on many struggles. But, you know, and I'm sorry to hark back to this, and I'll do this very quickly. If one thinks about how apartheid was overcome in South Africa, what were the crucial factors? There was an armed struggle, and I belong to a liberation movement that adopted armed struggle. I mean, to be honest with you all, the ANC was absolutely rubbish at armed struggle, but it was symbolically incredibly important to hit back against a brutal, aggressive, militarized state. Second of all, massive global solidarity that there should be against apartheid Israel today. And a part of that solidarity was boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which is one of the most powerful strategies. Then you had massive strategic litigation in South Africa and all over the world, trying to hold this repulsive state to account for its brutal racism. But finally, you had the vast majority of South Africans making huge swathes of the country ungovernable. So it was all of those things together. Now, if you regard those as civil resistance, most of which was nonviolent, then absolutely, I think it's incredibly important today. I think we've got to take on power which is both state power and economic power, which have become completely intertwined and indistinguishable in every possible way that we can. And what is our objective? Our objective is to profoundly change the paradigm of our politics and economics. We're in an interregnum. We know our current paradigm has failed. We don't know what that next paradigm is going to look like. And it's up to you, young people like you who run Just Stop Oil and who are involved in Just Stop Oil, to figure out what that next paradigm is going to look like and to ensure it's one of justice, equality, and hopefully non-violence and peace.
Thank you, Andrew. Lazarus, don't forget to unmute your microphone as well.
Our campaign, right from 1999, when Mossad was formed, was built on a peaceful, non-violent approach. And that has worked for us to a large extent. We have concentrated on mobilizing forces against shell. Demonstration has been peaceful. Our approach of attending conferences and presenting our case in UN and all these other bodies outside Nigeria has worked very well for us. Being members of other organizations like Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization, which is an indigenous and minority organization, has actually helped us as well. So looking at what Andrew said in terms of global action, either divestments or boycotts, those are strategies that has worked very, very well in some other cases, particularly like in South African case, which can also work for the Israeli case and other cases as well. So looking at that is something that I will recommend, moving forward, in terms of how we can gather a lot of momentum and inform people about steps that they need to take for us to be able to control some of these activities that are happening around us, like, the case of election that is coming up in the UK and what people need to do. Although the Labour Party, I don't see them as being very strong in terms of, what the people are looking for. They are undecided. I mean, they are so ambivalent about most of the things that they are doing. They look at what is actually happening and try to adjust to it. But maybe that might work for them. But, it is important that we just look at these strategies, this non-violent approach and global strategies and adopt it. That would be much, much better in my view.
Cool, thank you, Lazarus. Angie?
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum of different strategies and tactics that we need, and no one of them is going to work on their own. And we have to understand that different groups and organizations are going to choose different ways to do it, but we're all working towards the same thing. So yes, we have to have a divestment. We have to have civil resistance that might lead to arrest. Sabotage, I think sabotage is really, really important. Non-violent, make sure no people are getting hurt, but we have to make it cost something, these awful corporations that are just raking in the money. The other thing is that maybe all the social change groups need to come together. They need to put one or two of their main policy changes together, and then all of us support all of them. So we need to show that we have already worked out the changes that are needed, the structural changes that are needed, and then all these different groups should be working together to support all of the different social change movements. Because as you were saying, Jeff, it's not just one little single thing. It's everything is linked. and therefore all of our movements have to link together. We could talk a bit more. We haven't got.
Okay, thank you, Angie and Jeff.
Well, I think what, if I can presume to know what happened in South Africa, I think South Africa, the anti-apartheid struggle succeeded to some degree because they had a clear end game. Everyone knew one person, one vote. That's what we're boycotting for. It wasn't only end occupation. It wasn't just slogans or end apartheid or different slogans. It was a very clear end goal. And I think, to pick up on what Angie just said, which I think is very useful, she made me think about the UN millennial goals that were set. I mean, I don't think they've been met exactly, but that was actually a very good strategy. They put out, I don't know, I can remember how many goals there were, but in a very, in a sense, in a cross issue kind of a way to try to encompass as much as possible in terms of maybe how to make the world a better place in a general way. The millennial goals were there. There's 1, 2, 3. So it gave you goalposts. First of all, it gave you end games, and it gives you certain goalposts to measure how well you're doing. And in a sense, it created, I think what Angie is maybe hinting at here is a common agenda. We need because we all have the same agenda. Not only do we have different tactics, which is fine and important, but we all have different pieces of it. We have different issues, but each issue doesn't stand by itself. Each one is integrated with the other ones. And so only by somehow coming together into some kind of an infrastructural framework or something like that, I can't get anybody interested in my own People Yes Network idea. I've tried, and I don't see anything else out there. And I think until we can do that, we don't really have a forum. We don't have a framework for bringing our issues together, to deciding what our millennial goals are, to decide on our strategies. And in a sense, our problem is, how does civil society affect the government policy, especially since government policy itself is determined largely by corporations? So we're in a bad marriage. We can't do things ourselves. We need governments. They have the authority, they have the power, and we really have to be strategic, and we really have to mobilize people. But mobilizing doesn't mean going out on the street necessarily, over a particular issue. Mobilizing means mobilizing around a goal, around an end game. So I think maybe, and oil and energy and climate change are certainly key parts of that, but they link to other things, like Andrew was saying, to the military, and so on. So maybe we should take as a project trying to get together our global millennial goals and begin to organize around them.
Yeah, that sounds great. All really, really super helpful points and positive visions towards a future we can all live in. So we've actually got a time for a couple more direct questions to individuals. So Jeff, we have a question for you that lots of people have asked. What do you think would be the worst possible consequence and the best possible consequence of Israel being compelled to leave Palestine alone?
Well, Israel can't leave Palestine. Israel controls Palestine. I don't know how we could leave it alone. Even though Gaza is the dramatic tragedy that's playing out before our eyes, politically, actually, what's more important is what's happening in the West Bank, because that's where Israel is extending to the east in terms of apartheid regime. It has no interest in Gaza per se. Biden and Europe have already threatened, I take it as a threat, that as soon as the fighting breaks down, they're going to move very aggressively towards what they call a two-state solution. And a two-state solution, if you know the lay of the land here, is apartheid. It's Israel on 78% of Palestine, plus the West, plus what we call Area C of the West Bank, which is another 62% of the occupied territory, plus Jerusalem. So we're really heading towards apartheid. I'm a part of a group. It's a Palestinian-led group called the One Democratic State Campaign, and what we're advocating for. You can look up our manifesto on onestatecampaign.org. Is the only way out of this is to create one democratic state over all of historic Palestine that gives everyone equal rights. The refugees come home, and we begin to live in equality in a shared society. That's the only way out. We have to stop thinking about an Israel. In a sense, Israel disappears. Israel and the occupation is transformed into a democracy of equal rights for everyone, which I'm not so sure why it's such an outrageous idea in the West to transform an apartheid regime into a democracy, but somehow that's very controversial. But that's, I think, the end game that we have, and in that way, I think we can. That's the only way. You're not going to do it by looking at two sides. It's not a conflict. It's a settler colonial unilateral project of Judaizing Palestine. And the only way out of a colonial project is not through negotiations or compromise. It's through decolonization. And decolonization then leading to, again, one democratic state.
Cool, thank you, Jeff. I think this is going to be our last question, and it's for Angie. Will the climate crisis compound war? What is the likelihood of climate collapse leading to war, in your opinion?
We've already got it, haven't we? I mean, what's going on in Ukraine, no, we've already got it. And, war isn't just when people are bombing each other. It's when you have the homeless without a place to live and food banks on things. We have got a war going on in Europe at the moment. Climate change is going to make it worse. Everything that we rely on is breaking down. You just have to look around you. In Britain at the moment, things are collapsing. The only thing that's going to help now is to remember, and this is where I disagree with you, Jeff, we have power. Parliaments don't have power. Corporations and structures have power. We have to take down those structures. But by doing that, we have to work together with all the people in our local areas, talk to them and work out on the streets, how are we going to build resilient communities? And we'll do that in many different ways, by walking slowly in the streets to bring it up to people's attention, people's assemblies, working with people that have got very, very different ideas. The war is here with us. Climate change is getting worse and worse and worse. We have to start creating the alternatives ourselves in our local communities.
Thank you, Angie. What a brilliant way to round up. So thank you to all our panelists for that really fascinating discussion and sharing of knowledge, expertise and experience. I think we've all learned something and also been inspired about how we can take action. Finally, tonight we will hear from our amazing Just Stop Oil supporter, Bertie Coyle. Bertie is a Just Stop Oil supporter and culture writer who has experience working and volunteering in youth mentoring, homelessness support and housing justice. He is interested in global justice, local communities, and abolitionism. Bertie helped develop the No Prison Ships campaign, including the Bibi Stockholm blockade, which was born from a desire to expand the scope of radical climate activism to migrant justice and solidarity. Such a pleasure to welcome you, Bertie. Please go for it.
Thanks a lot, Isla. And thanks to all the speakers today. It's been unbelievably illuminating. My name's Bertie Coyle. I'm a Just Stop Oil supporter. I've been so for over a year. I joined Just Stop Oil because I saw a poster outside Peckham Library. It invited me to a call. Evidently, I had nothing better to do. I became a supporter after taking part in the regular sort of tofu and potatoes work of slow marching and roadblocks, which, as Ida said, is still going on this week, every day, midday at Trafalgar Square. I'd really love to see you there. After doing that for some time, I ended up taking part in this campaign called No Prison Ships. That involved a group of wonderful, incredible people taking part in action on the South Coast, where this group of people blockaded the Bibi Stockholm barge. The Bibi Stockholm was a ship that was commissioned by the UK government it was contracted to this Australian firm called CTM for more than 1.5 billion quid. That was during the kind of tender bonanza that Michael Gove oversaw during the COVID era. Massive money spent, zero transparency. We all know how it is. It's a recommissioned barge that's been used as accommodation, temporary accommodation for workers and as detention centre for migrants. It's a boat, but really it's a horrible, awful nexus of evil. When I feel something really strongly about something so big and so complex and so bad, like oil or the Baby Stockholm, I find it easier to just take action rather than think too much or philosophize too much about it. That's why I'm always glad that JSO is there to help direct this in a strategic way. So I'm not just doing cartwheels down the high street screaming. Bibby Line, the company which built the Baby Stockholm and owns it, proudly calls itself a family business. It was founded by John Bibby, who's a slave trader. A Glasgow councillor who was a gas worker that lived on the Baby Stockholm for a period 10 years ago said it's completely unsuitable for asylum seekers to live on. The Fire Brigades Union called it a death trap, and a whistleblower from the local council called it a floating Grenfell. Just Stop Oil's best known for taking action at the site of extraction, whether that's oil infrastructure or agitating for a change in policy for no new oil and gas. These are things that might help people to remain in their homes, but we also have to preserve people's right to move. And that's why I took action at the Baby Stockholm. I'm going to list a few of the reasons people were forced to leave their homes and migrate across the world. LGBT people face severe persecution in certain places. In Sudan, young men may be killed to stop them rebelling against the government or used as child soldiers. In places like Afghanistan, young men are the primary target for recruitment by radical groups like ISIS and the Taliban. And people are fleeing extreme and dangerous weather patterns. So for this reason, boys as young as 13 are forced to run away from their homes and their families seeking asylum. People come to the UK because they have language and family ties. It doesn't take two brain cells to work this out. It's very natural why people come to this country. And they undergo an extremely dangerous journey, dangerous crossing to get here. They face massive border violence in places like Poland and at every border. Crossing the Sahara Desert in Libya, they face abuse, trafficking, all of these things. This is why it's generally undertaken by young men who will plan to fly their family over later. We don't have a migrant crisis so much as a crisis of injustice. The UK isn't taking nearly enough migrants as it is. It's only a tiny amount of people coming to this country. 74% of people in the UK have sympathy towards asylum seekers and refugees. It's the same with climate issues. The massive repression and oppression of migrants and repression of environmental issues is not the will of the people. The fight against climate crisis is a fight against a monstrous system of global racism. People that live in the global south, in smaller nations, places like Bangladesh, Syria, Sudan, they're considered disposable by the corrupt carbon elite. That's a class that includes our leaders in the West. They're willing for mass death to happen, entire homelands to be left uninhabitable, just so they can have wasteful, polluting, profiteering business as usual for a few years longer. It's hard to summarize my feelings about it because I find it both like despicable, but also pathetic at the same time. But this is why I take action against oil, coal, and gas. Fossil fuel extraction serves nobody but the very wealthiest. So that's why these people are agitating against the green transition. Oil, as our speakers today have been saying, oil is like an enormous, terrible membrane that touches everything and it corrupts and pollutes everything it touches. When taking action at the Baby Stockholm, I took a great deal of time to reflect on local opposition to the barge. A lot of people in Portland, which is the place where it was docked, have been hit really hard by austerity, by the cost of living crisis, by the housing crisis. So the government and other bad actors tried to weaponize these crises to turn the people of Portland against their natural friends and allies, who are migrants, displaced people, and asylum seekers. This is my experience of the terrible connection between oil, money, and conflict. At the local end of the equation, the brutality of border violence, the ways communities and families are manipulated, and ultimately the abuse and detention of innocent people rather than challenging the profitable hegemony of blood, oil, and conflict. When we block the road, when we block the first coach of migrants going to Bibi Stockholm, we expect we might face arrest. We didn't expect the coach driver to try what I now call the Jeremy Corbyn technique and turn us into homemade jam. That coach was an extension of the Home Office, figuratively speaking. It was a tool of border violence, metaphorically speaking, and quite literally speaking, it was a 12-ton vehicle that tried to run us over that I saw my comrades going under the wheelbase of. It was transporting people that came to this country to flee conflict, to flee destitution, to flee unnatural, dangerous weather patterns. And it was going to put them straight back onto a deadly ship after they'd just taken a deadly sea journey to get here. It's completely disgraceful. But a message did get back to us from these people, the now residents of the barge, that they understood and appreciated the action we took that day. The fight isn't over, and I know I'm going to be continuing to take action with Just Stop Oil, to demand an end to new oil and gas in the UK, and to take action in solidarity with all people coming to this country. And I really hope some of you might join me, because I know we need the skills, the bravery, and the persistence you have to offer. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Bertie. Such passionate words. Massive thank you to all our panelists and speakers for sharing your years worth of knowledge and inspiring ways to move forward.